The following content has been provided by RWTH Aachen University.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to DIS1. Hope you had a good midterm. And today we're going to dive into a new topic that might seem strange to you. But if you imagine for a moment that you're in an architecture class, let's say you're studying architecture, then one of the things that would surely happen is that you would be having a class on sort of the old masters, right? You would be going over the designs of, I don't know, Corbusier and other important architects and Frank Lloyd Wright and whatnot. And the point of seeing those is not to say, oh, you got to build like these guys, but rather to see, okay, over the centuries, in the case of architecture, maybe even millennia, stuff happened, right? People had suddenly new ideas, or the way that architects would design buildings would fundamentally change because somebody had a new vision of how this could work. And that makes a lot of sense if you're in architecture, because then you kind of see trajectories emerging, right? You see how things change over the last couple, decades, centuries, whatever, and you might be able to better understand what's happening today and tomorrow. And in a way, HCI is not that different from architecture. While architects design real environments that people have to use and that hopefully are a joy to live in, we design virtual environments in the broadest sense that people, interact with, in a way live inside and have to hopefully enjoy while they're using them. So you can think of HCI and architecture, as sort of cousins in the field, that they both design environments for people who are not themselves and who need to actually live in these and interact with them. And that's why we will also take a look at the history of HCI, not to say, oh, all these great old things, but more to see trajectories emerging and to understand where things changed, how they changed, and why something that might seem awesome and sold to you in certain keynotes as really cool is actually kind of an old hat if you look at it. All right, so let's start this with an actual example of that. The radically new interface of a watch I saw the other day. This is a watch that basically has a calculator built in. But how do you use it? Well, we've all seen the iPhone and touchscreens and stuff like this, and they took the same idea of a touchscreen, but didn't actually make it into display. It's just a touch surface. So you can actually wear this watch, and if you want to enter, let's say, 3 plus 7, what do? You basically just scribble 3 plus 7 equals onto the touchscreen on that watch, and it will give you the result in the tiny display up there. So that's pretty cool if you think about it, because it also solves this problem. People used to have these old calculator watches, like lots of tiny little buttons on there, like a millimeter square each. And you don't have to do that here. So you're making great use of the surface that is used to display the time to also act as an interaction input area. So you can do this actually with your fingers without even looking at the screen. Now, the interesting thing here is, however, that this watch was released in 1984. So the technology that we're seeing here, cool touch screen, gesture recognition, actually even simple character recognition, if you like, of handwritten numbers, is 30 plus years old. And the point of this is that technology evolves sort of similar to culture over time, and oftentimes you see things in the present that are actually, that have been already hinted at in the past. This watch is from Bill Buxton's collection, and here's a URL down here. Bill Buxton is a great HCI researcher who's done some amazing work reaching back to the 80s. And he has a collection of strange or interesting, influential, interactive devices that he's documented online under that URL. So I encourage you to take a look at that and see which of these things you've maybe played with yourself when you were a kid as a joystick or whatever, or which devices you've actually encountered or which seem very strange to you. And Buxton does this because he wants to make sure that we kind of learn from what has been done in the past, so we don't repeat things and don't stand still, but actually can build on other people's ideas. And this is the point that you often hear, right? If you look at art, for example, even Picasso, knew everything about art history because basically you got to know the rules first, and then you can start really breaking them. And it's great to invent new stuff, but it's very helpful to know what's already out there so that your new stuff can actually be, a distance away from the state of the art. So knowing about the history of HCI will also help you not to reinvent the wheel and not to come up with a cool idea and spend a lot of time building it, researching, whatever, when somebody else has already done it. So the first thing that we will hopefully take away from the HCI history is that there is, Buxton put it dramatically, without history we're all lost, essentially. If we don't know this stuff, we're really going to be struggling to be inventive and to move things forward. The second thing is that there is no single hero. What this means is invention or innovation in HCI, as in all other fields of science and design and art, is an iterative, collaborative process. Today, even more so than it used to be before we had the internet and social networks and had the ability to essentially exchange ideas across the globe as a gigantic inventive mind. So it's not like somebody was sitting at Apple drinking coffee and going like, oh, I think an iPhone would be awesome, and it's like has a touch screen. This is not how this happens, right? These things have lots of iterations over the time, and sometimes things run into problems economically or technically, so the idea isn't ripe for mass deployment, but then a couple of years later it maybe is. Oh, sorry. And the other thing is that during different phases of technology, forces also shift. If you look at a very early design, for example, it may very well be designed mostly for alpha geeks to pick it up, right? Very technology driven. So it's something that the first GPS systems, for example, were like really clunky things, or the very first cell phones were things that you could kill somebody with, right? And you had to carry it in a little backpack. And then things move on to business cases where it actually starts making sense to maybe have a car phone in your car when you are like a traveling salesperson. And then it moves to the private mass market, and design and usability and ease of use and attractiveness become much more important until it really sort of becomes an everyday thing. Like today's smartphones, everybody has one. So this is a typical development that you will often see with new technologies. As they mature, then the usability becomes more of an issue. And at some point, they may very well also oversaturate. So because features keep creeping in, we saw this with phones, with cell phones before the advent of the iPhone and other smartphones, where people were trying to cram more and more buttons onto this little box, and it became stuffed with tiny little buttons, and the screen became smaller and smaller because there had to be all these buttons. So the system became kind of oversaturated with features.
This content was provided by RWTH Aachen University.